Welcome to Write On, the podcast from Final Draft. This is the show where we talk about all things screenwriting. I'm your host, Phil Galasso. Today we have an interview with Sarah Burgess, head writer of Impeachment, American Crime Story. The new season of the hit show follows Monica Lewinsky, Linda Tripp, and the events surrounding the impeachment of President Bill Clinton.
As you no doubt heard, you get to work in the West Wing as of this morning. You're going to be working right beside the people who run the world. Please, be professional.
There's a woman I'm very close to. In the midst of an affair with the President of the United States.
How do I know it's true?
Hello?
You will lose her as a friend.
I've made my peace with that.
Are you sure you have enough evidence?
My calls with Monica.
Holy shit.
It all has to come out.
The press will destroy her.
You don't know the half of it.
My wife went into a hotel room with Bill Clinton.
That is a lie.
Mr. President, do you know a woman named Monica Lewinsky?
That's me. That's my face.
This isn't about justice.
Then what is it about?
Impeachment.
William Jefferson Clinton, do you solemnly swear that you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
Sarah and I discussed her approach to writing characters based on real-life people, telling a familiar story through a new lens, working with Ryan Murphy, and more. Check it out. Sarah, thank you for taking the time to chat, and it must be a relief now that you're done. I guess it must have been crazy with the pandemic and everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's a relief. It's hard to, I know it's not a relief. I'm actually I'm with the pandemic. It's been 3 years now that I've been working on this, 2.5 to 3 years. And especially the past year, I was incredibly involved in all the details and intricacies of these characters' lives. By characters, I obviously mean real people that I've turned into characters. It's, it's hard to let go of some of them. And always as a writer, to just face the complete and total abyss of what is next, So I might go work at a bank. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I just have to accept that, right? That's our life I'm just going into an abyss in a few days. So that's sort of where I am right now emotionally.
You mentioned, taking real life people and turning them into characters. Now, so what's that process like for you, and what responsibility do you feel you have to the real person? I mean, look, I looked at our call sheet or our schedule, and by the end there were 400 cast members on this thing or something like that. It's crazy. So there's a whole array of types of people that you're writing about. Some only appear briefly, but they're still real people. And actually, even then, you think about the responsibility to make sure whatever they're doing and the way they're behaving comports with who they really are. Obviously, I think your question probably pertains especially to the 5 to 6 points of view that I wrote in a lot, which is a mix of different types of people. You have Paula Jones and Monica Lewinsky, who were both young women pulled into a situation not of their own making, in the sense that Monica had worldwide fame and notoriety and loathing thrown at her for a story that she did not desire to become public. Paula Jones simply was, had some kind of interaction with Bill Clinton in a hotel room. And then I was pulled into sort of kind of a conspiracy in ways to, in a lawsuit that I believe, but also there are many people with many different political interests, I think, pushing her in different directions, hence my use of the word conspiracy. So, with people like Monica and Paula, I think, of course, there's a responsibility to adopt their point of view, to both, to put it bluntly, do good writing, which means to write people with all of their jagged edges and mistakes and choices that they might want to have back, and moments of great insight and cleverness, but also moments where they're perhaps not seeing something that with hindsight they would have, they're not seeing something clearly, just like all of us in our daily lives. Sure. I think with Monica in particular, of course, that weighed on me very heavily to do right by her, because her life, above all the others in this show, in this story, her life was really blown up. At a young age, the level of fame she reached was so extreme
I think obviously with the characters of like Bill Clinton and Linda Tripp, you have people who are, who interacted with Monica in ways that in some ways negatively affected her life. In some ways were close to her. How do you make real characters? For me, I always start with how do you turn these people into characters? I think particularly when it came to like Linda Tripp, it was about, I noticed something in interviews with her or articles about her, the way that Linda spoke, her word choice really grabbed me and was one of the things that pulled me into the story, to be honest. I always, come from theater. So people talking is usually the only thing I'm writing. I don't think visually that well, to be honest. The way Linda's the way she talked about her job, there's this great moment there's a Jane Mayer piece about Linda that quoted her talking about her time working at the White House and the transition between the Bush White House and the Clinton White House in the early 90s. And there's this great line, Jane Mayer quoted her hairdresser saying that she would kind of complain about how the Clintons were more casual than the Bushes.
Mm-hmm.
And she said about Hillary Clinton, she noticed Hillary would use like the public ladies' room in the West Wing. And Linda had said, the real Linda Tripp said, Mrs. Bush would rather have been catheterized than use the public restroom. And that sentence, honestly, is the reason I took the job. Everything about that, there's never been a less necessary word choice than catheterized. And the knowingness of that, the judgment on Hillary, but also the sort of delight in being able to talk about Hillary Clinton, one of the most famous women in the world, and compare her to Barbara Bush. It suggested a character to me. So I was writing the character I felt from the real thoughts and word choice, or telling myself from the real sort of personality and thoughts and word choice of this actual person who is an enormously complicated character who did a terrible thing. That really pulled me into it. I was able to tell myself, at least, that I was writing from her in a way. And then, of course, as a writer, you always end up on your own journey with that, and the character takes control, or whatever people say. That answers your question. Yeah,
absolutely. So, you said 400 characters by the end of this thing.
Something like that. Yeah.
How do you keep track of such a sprawling story? How do you find the right ways into it? Is there just an extensive outlining process? I know you're drawing from a lot of research material, obviously, but how did that work for you in this one?
The research first. I always love research. That's always been my thing. My first play was about a private equity firm, and I really wrote it just because I got excited to try to learn the language of private equity and how people speak in those rooms internally. So, the first 6 months to a year of this was taking in all the many, many books written about this, the FBI 302's grand jury transcripts, obviously the Linda Tripp tapes. There's so much to take in. And then the way to write the story, how do you then make choices about how to focus the story? So you're not just doing a webcam, just depicting every single thing that happened. It was character first, as you've seen, we start in the points of view. I got excited about writing in the point of view of these sort of ignored bureaucratic women. Like Linda Tripp and Monica were both working in an office, and we're the kind of women in an office that you're sort of there's some secretaries over there. If I'm an important person, that's not who I'm here to see. Who cares about them? So I think I focused, all of that I took in, I focused on sort of writing scenes starting in that point of view, because I found it so, it's just the fact that the two sort of, a couple of the office ladies, who sort of typically seem unimportant in our world, that friendship then almost took down the head of state and most powerful nation on earth was obviously an interesting story to me. So that focused my storytelling. But also, of course, I'm writing in the third season of this series with producers who worked on the O.J. Simpson season that I thought was really wonderful. I remember watching that for the first time, just being stunned at just being delighted by it, and stunned that I guess I use the word stunned just because I didn't know. I thought I knew that story, and the O.J. Simpson. I was kind of a kid when that happened, of course, but I don't know. I was to take in a story that I thought I knew and to be so delighted by it and also challenged by it. I was amazed. So obviously, I of course, especially working with Brad Simpson and Nina Jacobson, produced that with Ryan Murphy, and the three of them were my dramaturgs on this too. And so of course, structurally, we had a ton of meetings, and they had a ton of input about how they did that with OJ, and OJ was that season, and the way that it was 5 or 6 points of view. And even though that's a courtroom drama, and this is very much not, I think I of course was always mindful that I was writing in that vein because it's the third season of the same series. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and you bring up something interesting. I've been watching some of the episodes, and I had a similar reaction to this as you did just said you did to the OJ series, which is I thought I knew this story. I mean, I was younger when it happened, and some of this, even just the stuff like Linda and Monica eating in the cafeteria, Linda complaining about her cubicle mate, like it grounded the story in a way that I wasn't prepared. I wasn't expecting. I wasn't prepared for. And yeah, it gave me a new lens to look at this very well-known story through. I'm just curious, you mentioned you're going from 5 or 6 characters' points of view, and they are all complicated characters. What are your feelings what are your feelings on audience sympathy and empathy? And, because, you spend a lot of time in Linda Tripp's head, and it's not necessarily the most pleasant place in the world. As a writer, how are you kind of keeping track of all that?
Does it seem unpleasant when you watch it? Are you I'm curious for your
No. It's compelling. I don't mean it's very compelling, but it's
I didn't mean unpleasant for you. I didn't mean that you were sitting there, Phil was sitting there watching it being but you're saying how do I? It is a lot of time in Linda's head. You say, did that weigh on me to be in that point of view? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just curious. It would seem that it might be a line you could cross. There might be a line you could cross that would make the character downright completely villainous, and he's not. But that's, and I think you could probably say that for a lot of characters in the show. Yeah. You can paint them in one easy way, but then there's layers to them all. And I'm just curious, as a writer, how you approach characters like that, building those layers so that they don't seem like complete villains or complete innocents.
Totally. Yeah. And that's the fear, right? Because you could imagine and hopefully, I don't know, the show hasn't come out yet, so maybe people will receive it that way and I'll just have to walk into a freeway or something before I go home. But you've stated a big concern. And actually one reason I was hesitant at first it sounds so stupid, but I was there does seem like a risk here, which is the obvious thing you could end up doing is writing a story where the Paula Joneses and Monica Lewinskys are very two-dimensional characters who don't have full humanity and are just portrayed as innocents because you're too afraid to write them as complicated people, and that you depict Bill Clinton as as pure evil, just absolute Darth Vader, and Linda Tripp as a monster. I think that there's a few things. One is that I do think you can write anything. You can try to write anything. You can't control what you can sort of give life to or not. You can't control what draws you in or not. It's sort of like dating in that way. You can go on a date with a great person, but you might just be all right, I'm going to go. I have to go watch, I have to go home and watch some YouTubes. I don't know, or whatever. You're just not that I would say that thing, but so I do have a natural interest in people the ignored bureaucrat who probably, if she could have gone to college, would be an orthodontist, would be a little more intellectually stimulated by her work, who I think understandably feels immense grief at the loss of her position in the White House, which is what happens in episode 1. I'm from DC. I've walked in those marble hallways. They give you an immense charge. The West Wing is the most prestigious place to work in the United States, right? What else is there? I don't know. I guess Apple, not anymore, maybe 10 years ago. I don't know. Who cares? I don't know why I'm attacking Apple now, but so I was drawn into a feeling of empathy with Linda Tripp. And I found that sentence I told you, the way she spoke with, of course, yes, self-importance, but are we all self-important when we're tied to a big institution? Aren't I working on this job? Aren't I being I have to do a meeting with Ryan Murphy? Aren't I doing that too? Don't we all do that? Maybe not all of us. I know people in my life who probably have a healthier relationship to ambition than I do, but I do, I think, so that was not hard for me, to be honest, to sort of look at Linda as this person who I think feels loneliness and attachment to her job and everything, the anger of being invisible, that anger does not go nowhere. Going into that was not something that was super hard for me, to be honest, whatever that says about me and my own pathologies, and not what she did to Monica. That I did have basically a nervous breakdown as I was writing. It was very hard for me as Linda's behavior became more and more bad is the word I'll choose, right? Yeah. As far as so I, because I had so locked myself into that point of view early on in the story. With Bill Clinton, for me, it was so that, so Linda, just as she existed, grabbed me and, the Slow Burn podcast has an interview with her that I think for me felt like it gave some nuance and complexity to however she lived with or didn't live with the thing that she did. I don't know. And that's my own take on it. It's just there just seemed to be something unspoken. I don't know, but maybe I'm just a crazy person about that. I found her very compelling. With Bill Clinton, I was kind of young when he was president. So reading his memoir and his life story in his childhood did give me something as far as where he ended up and the way he lived his life. He speaks openly in his memoir about kind of having two selves and having kind of like almost like a black box in himself where he locks away some of the things he does. So I just, I was able to access some humanity for him and it's not like I don't understand why people have affairs
Sure.
or, and I of course understand that, I think especially in the light of today, the immense abuse of power that represented is very clear, but it seemed, my job is to write from his point of view. And this is a person who was raised, in the sort of 40s and 50s to
Sure.
behave a certain way. And so, you write people from their own point of view. And I'm very comfortable with removing morality from the equation when I'm in that character's point of view, if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does. And I want to talk about that a little bit more because one of the things that I found really interesting and surprising, I guess, is, early on when the affair between Monica and Bill is sort of plays out, it's very two-sided. It's like, there certainly is the problematic power dynamic, but she's attacking it just as much as he is, maybe more. And I think a lot of people would expect to see, the more predatory sort of situation and can you just talk? I mean, I know you're drawing from reality, from interviews, from the book, but can you talk about that a little bit? Because I think, through a modern lens, it's, through a Me Too lens, it's very interesting to see it portrayed like that.
Because the same is true of Monica is true of all the characters, which is so what happened, the way that the first few episodes was written and, the content you're talking about, basically Monica's life before she's made world famous, before even Linda starts taping her calls with her, when Monica's in the White House and when she meets Bill Clinton. I wrote those 3 episodes very closely based on Monica's memoir, Monica's story, and her interview with Barbara Walters at the time, which is really worth watching because, in that interview, Monica speaks about her relationship with Bill Clinton. My job was to adopt, 20-something Monica's point of view in that situation. And so I wrote based on Monica's story. And then I had the incredible asset of Monica Lewinsky herself reading my script and giving me feedback. So I basically trusted that in the writing of it, the scripts would reflect how Monica experienced it. Because as you're saying, you want to make sure that you're depicting the relationship, whatever our current cultural condition is, in the way that it felt to her at the time. And so I trusted her to sort of check me on that. And, she even suggested that I add a scene or two to episode 2 where, when we kind of see some of her and Bill's interactions and Bill Clinton's interactions, for example, them meeting up in she suggested the scene where they would sort of intentionally meet up in a hallway and quote unquote, run into each other. And then, though that is an incredibly problematic thing to happen in a workplace between the most powerful person there and also the most powerful person in the world, incidentally, and a person who had at that point, I think, worked in legislative affairs, a very young person in a staff job. For her, the experience of that was, she said, she characterized it as, of course, there was excitement to it. So I had to have it's really for, because I had her, I think, to lean on. I was writing from that, writing it in that way and trusting that depicting her experience of it was the most truthful thing, and that was the right thing to do. And as I wrote it, and because she was reading the scripts, I felt, I guess, confident in doing that. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine she's a very valuable resource to have around when you're trying to tell this story. But I think, just to put a little bit of a button on that, I think you used the word relationship, and I think that's the part that surprised me is that it was a relationship. It wasn't just a quickie affair that they were giving gifts to each other and stuff like that. It was very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and I think that's another thing. Taking my cue from Monica, I think that. And as you're, I think, saying too, you and I probably we weren't like deep into this, probably kids at the time, but I think people did have I know people had a distorted perspective on what it was at the time because of misogyny, because of the Starr report, because of the way that, the sexual details became all that people sort of knew. So in telling the story, it's like, well, this is what, the experience sort of felt like for her. And, and I will leave it to Monica, who had to comment on the degree to which relationship and I think she has recently sort of written, she wrote something a couple years ago in Vanity Fair about the idea that this of course does represent an abuse of power, and how she feels about that and her evolving opinion about that is very fascinating, and it's her right to sort of, I think, articulate how she feels about that, as with hindsight. What's
your writing process like? Are you outlining, I mean, obviously the true story, you have, sort of pillars to kind of set along the way, but do you outline extensively? Do you set rigorous deadlines for yourself? Do you wake up early in the morning? What is your process?
I really did not outline with this very much, which I know is weird. And part of that is because I think episode 1, I wrote an episode 1 that does feel like episode 1 in the sense that it's a lot of like the texture of Linda Tripp's life. And I sent that to my producers, and then it ended up being a great collaboration. They sort of worked with me, I think, structurally on some of the things, and it feel the sort of tone, the sort of tension of OJ and trying to. I mean, maybe we failed again spectacularly. I'm speaking to you before the show comes out, so who knows? It could be like a waking nightmare. I don't know it. And you'd be like, "Did you hear what happened to that woman? She disappeared." But like, I think so that it was really a collaboration between me and my producers. With that script, I because I come from the theater, I don't outline that much, which I know is horrible. And one day I will. I would work with, and then on episode 2 and 3, after 1 was completed, I was like, I would work especially with Brad Simpson, with sort of note cards and talking about how we would process the research, and then I would go off and write just based on sort of those discussions, frankly. And then we did have a writer's room for just a couple months not a couple months. How long was it? For a few months in late summer 2019 until like early fall 2019 or fall 2019, we had a writer's room. And so we met with a few other people to like talk about how we would sort of, because as you're saying, the research they got all to be on the research. I was kind of also writing at that time, and how we would sort of tell the story that we knew we were telling, with episodes 4 and through the remainder of the story. Eventually a season-long structure became kind of clear. Some episodes were more, the story flowed more naturally than others. Like one of the episodes was always going to be contained to one day. And it was so covered also by the FBI basically outlined it for me, to be honest with you, because it was like FBI. So like, it's, they were all sort of different in that regard. I don't wake up super early in the morning. I tend to write better in the morning. My producers haven't been as harsh with me as maybe they should have been. I would kind of be like, yeah, you'll get it when you get it. And because I ended up honestly, like through all of shooting, like they basically just had me. So it's like, as a writer, you ended up with like a lot of power because it's like, so I was like, I would just, I'll write in the morning. I think, I do this thing where I'm never honest with myself. I'm always like, well, I'll write all this tomorrow, and I never get far enough. So I'm always putting that pressure on myself. The end of the day is always crushing disappointment. I never wrote what I wanted to write. I'm always, very occasionally you'll attain that level of focus or something will feel good. It's always sort of like, getting up, starting in the morning. I do things that like I to distract myself, and then finally getting into it. Some days will be better than others, obviously, and I'll write through the whole day. And I don't really take days off, which is probably not good. Because again, I was sort of on my own for much of this. It was a lot of like working 7 days a week. Writing the final episode was an incredible challenge that we almost like blew up the entire production over. So in that case, I did have a deadline on me, and I was like locked in a hotel. Because there's like people screaming at me, not people screaming at me, but like to try and sort of, I had that sort of panic pressure too on me at that time. But I'm always searching for, I feel like I still don't have a good, like Toni Morrison, like woke up at 5 a.m. or whatever every day. And I still, one day maybe I'll have a good steady answer to that, but it always feels like a jumble,
I do know. So go back a little bit. How did you first know you wanted to be a writer, a playwright? And then, and beyond, when did you first get that pick?
I mean, I loved movies when I was a kid. Ended up going to NYU for undergrad for film. That was my college. I went to their undergrad film school. And then as I got out of NYU, I love New York, and I still do. I'm like, I can't quit it. It's like the only place I feel. Whatever. Now I'm just doing a New York commercial. But through my 20s, I think I got really interested in, I'm a very talky writer, too talky. You can watch show and see. It's just a lot of women talking to each other all the time, which is fine. We talk, the alternative is silence. But like I do, because of my fixation on that, I think language versus necessarily the image, I started to get pulled into theater. I saw some theater in New York that was like, just like rapid Irish monologues and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, that's like kind of interesting. So I kind of just decided to try writing plays and sort of stumbled around that for multiple years. I had like probably the best years of my life doing I started doing like tutoring around the city. And so I would go to different neighborhoods, like a lot of writers, I did tutoring. So every day I worked for like 3 hours going all around different neighborhoods, tutoring different things. And the rest of the time I would spend writing, or more accurately, of course, trying to write and hating myself. And then, but I kind of had this kind of secret idea that I wanted to be a playwright that I didn't really tell people. I wanted to write a play, or I liked theater. I loved musical theater, but I wasn't writing musicals. I was writing straight plays, the whole thing. By the time I was in my early 30s, I had gotten in, I've applied multiple times to this writers group. It's a big thing in New York. There'll be like theaters that have like writers group. I applied to this one at this theater, Ars Nova. They choose about 12 writers, and every other week you read a play. And by that point, after I finally eventually got into that, and I wrote a play while I was in that had a reading, and different theaters in New York wanted to do it. It was eventually produced by the Public Theater in New York. So that was sort of my path to that. But it was always, I guess, to answer your question, I never, I don't know, I don't have I have a hard time consciously thinking about things that I want, but I think I always was like, basically like, well, I'm just going to write things. You know, I didn't admit to it myself. I wanted to be a writer because I felt so corny. I felt like the girl in like high school class who is always telling people she's like a poet, you know what I mean? And like it brings like crystals or whatever, not to slam crystals. But it felt like a desire, you know, for a long time. And I shifted away from film just because it was, you know, like for the reasons I said, and now here I am back in Hollywood.
Do you hope to continue to do both, or are you committed to, you know, film and television now? You know,
No, I miss theater. I hope to continue to do both. Like I said, I feel that I'm entering an abyss, and so I don't know what I will do now. I think that I hope to do both.
Well, last question before we wrap up. Is there something you've learned across your career so far that you wish you could go back and tell yourself when you were first starting out?
Yeah, I'm sure. You know, I feel, look, it's a lot of luck that ends up in this situation. Again, unless you're talking to me before a catastrophic fall and if I have to get like, you know, like run out of town. So there's just that. I think that like, I'm not very patient with myself. I think that I remember having like a moment of clarity. I was probably, there's like the panic, right? When you're 25 and you're like, well, what am I like, why, like, what's going to happen to me? Like, am I just telling myself I'm going to be in like show business? Like how embarrassing. And then you're not. And so I think to know that like, it can take time. I think writers, you need something that's good on the page. That's all you need. You can live in Idaho. You can live in like Ottawa, not, you know, whatever. You don't have to live in, you know, the East Village or Santa Monica or whatever. To like that is the thing. I don't believe in meritocracy. I do believe there's luck. And, you know, I come from a sort of military family in the suburbs of DC. It's because I was able to go to NYU and move to New York that, you know, and I took out loans to do that and had to pay them off. And, you know, my parents helped with that to a degree. I come from a middle-class family, and it was not an easy thing for me to do that, or easy decision, but that is incredible good fortune I have to even have that as an option. So that is just a hard reality of life. If you are in any position to be able to write, I do think having faith that what you put on the page is really what matters, or is one of the two things that matters, the other being any access to give that to somebody, obviously. That can give you a sense of focus. I kept applying to this one writers group. When I finally got in, I remember standing in my apartment being like, okay, you have like I had this deep interest in writing about finance, about private equity, because I'm an idiot. But I was like, if you just I had this character was kind of talking to me. I had this interest in this thing. Something about it was alive to me. And so I was just like, take what you need that too, obviously, an idea that you actually care about. But I was like, you take a year and a half, just write the best thing you can. Like, that's all you need to do. That's what you need to focus on right now. And then putting myself in a position where I could do that psychologically, which meant not working in the business, but like tutoring and exposing myself to all, like being out in the world in a way that wasn't tied to the industry for me was really important. So I think knowing yourself in that way is important too. But we have to admit it that obviously any access, even the ability to get an assistant job or, you know, to work for low pay you know, there's only certain people obviously are able to access that. And that's just a reality. I do, however, believe that trying to write well is always worth our time. And like, I do think that is one thing we have that like actors and directors don't always, which is it can just be us in this. Now I'm just landing in cliche. It's not just like a writing teacher. I'm just like, it's just the page. It's you know, but like there is some truth to that. So I wish I had known not to panic. And be like, well, I'm a loser. I'm an idiot for trying to even do this, because it does take time. And then, you know, I was like 32, 33 before I had something, you know, produced. And there are people who have really early success, but that's just not going to be everybody. And life is long. You know, your friend like Doug can be doing amazing, and you feel like shit, and then the tables turn and they'll turn again. And, you know, and I think that is something I wish I had known. And I think, just to be aware of how, you know, fortunate we are to even have a chance to try, you know, and not to always just be like in a sense of misery and shame is something I work on every day and fail at, as you can see.
Good luck with that. Screw Doug. Don't care about him. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat, and congrats on the show.
Well, thank you, Phil. It's really nice talking to you.
Thanks again to Sarah Burgess for coming on the show. Impeachment, American Crime Story premieres Tuesday, September 7th on FX. And as always, thanks to you, our listeners. If you liked this episode, leave us a review. And if you haven't already, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. For news about future episodes and more, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at Final Draft Inc. and Instagram at Final Draft Screenwriting. This episode was produced by Kayla Guess with help from associate producer Emma Vranich. Music by T. Kelly. Thanks again, everyone. Until next time, right on.